Hi, welcome to Superhero Rundown. I'm Crimson, and today let's talk about cinematic universes, specifically non-American ones. That's right, we're talking about Gundala. But before we get to that, let's talk about Indonesia, where it takes place and what audience it caters to. Now, unfortunately, I don't know that much about Indonesian modern politics, but I will do my best to summarize what I found so you can understand how Gundala is political. The Indonesians were first colonized by the Dutch. Then during World War II, Japan took them over. After the war, the Indonesians had a national independence declared on August 17, 1945. But the Netherlands had other ideas. They tried to reassert their colonial holdings, but the Indonesians were not having it. So on December 27, 1949, the Dutch finally recognized the country as the Republic of the United States of Indonesia. I mean, it's more nuanced than that, but that's to give you an idea of what led up to the modern era of Indonesia. From the 1950s to today, there have been a lot of infrastructure improvements, and in 1962, they hosted the Asian Games in Jakarta. New suburbs were developed, and in the 1980s, they had some economic growth. In the 1990s, they had massive foreign investment and a real estate boom. In 1997, they experienced the Asian financial crisis, and Jakarta itself became a center of violence, protest, and political maneuvering. While presidents were ineffective, Jakarta became the center of protest and instability. In addition, Indonesia has seen many terrorist attacks in the form of bombings. It is this background that Gundala finds itself in. Since Gundala has been released, Indonesia's economy has bounced back from the pandemic, and they were even given the chairmanship of the G20 summit, which is a big deal. There are many issues that the Indonesians are still grappling with. But for much of 2022, Indonesian policymakers had to grapple with unprecedented and largely unanticipated global economic and geostrategic volatility, the war in Ukraine and the subsequent rise in energy and food prices, rapidly rising global inflations and subsiding economic growth, the possibility of debt defaults in many developing countries, sharply slowing growth and rising uncertainty in China, the region's economic locomotive, ongoing disruption to global supply chains, and rising geostrategic tension and rivalry between China and the United States. Gundala does tie himself to Indonesian identity and does it well. He unites the people around him, including politicians and laymen. Most of the climax involves a politician asking Gundala for help. And he's also going to be the rallying point of the team up of heroes in this cinematic universe. A fictional universe with a major presence in films is referred to as a cinematic universe. Things like Snyder's DC run, the MCU, James Bond, Planet of the Apes, Star Wars, Star Trek, and the new DC universe by Gunn, just to name a bunch of American properties. But what about non-American properties? Sure, there's Godzilla, but I'm thinking of another Asian country. Enter Indonesia. Now, I'm not really the person to ask about Indonesian comic book culture either, so I found someone named Raphael Modemeyer to explain it for me. Indonesia has a long history with comic books, with stories drawing from folklore and tales of heroism appearing in the early 1950s. By the 80s, the country's comic industry was booming, with teen romance comics, martial arts comics, and superheroes becoming hugely popular, though a lack of translation resources made broadening the audience almost impossible. Gundala, who debuted in the 1969 comic book Gundala, Son of Lightning, as a scientist supercharged with the power of lightning, arrived only 7 years after the debut of Thor in Marvel Comics. Yes, the Indonesian world of comics is prolific. Joko Anwar, a director from Indonesia itself, was tasked with starting a cinematic universe surrounding these characters. And no, I can't pronounce it, but its first entry is a lot of fun. To date, it looks like 3 of the films have been released, including one named Virgo and the Sparklings. Most of the entries are still in pre-production, though, because the human malware screwed up everybody's life. While I feel that some of these entries are more geared toward Indonesian culture as it is their comic book universe, I would be amiss if I didn't point out some of the things I liked about the film.
Karena kalau kita diam saja melihat ketidakadilan di depan mata kita, itu tandanya kita bukan manusia lagi.
The film starts out with the death of the main character's father. The character, whose name is Sanchaka, goes through grief for his father, and then his mother disappears. After being trained in combat by another orphan, Sanchaka grows up. He works at a newspaper factory, and during a storm fighting some mob thugs, he gets struck by lightning, becoming Gundala. Denying that he is a hero, he then feels responsible for not helping some vendors after their establishment is burned to the ground. There's a lot of humor in the film, too, with the highlight being... Anyway, when the vendors go to confront the guy on the payroll who burned their stuff, people start getting sick from contaminated rice. It's revealed that the poison will not let the next generation tell right from wrong, leaving an absence of morality. At this point, Gundala makes a suit, fights a violinist with a fucking sword bow, and mobilizes to stop the antidote. The antidote being the actual poison.
Oh, right, the poison for Kuzco, the poison chosen specially to kill Kuzco, Kuzco's poison.
Yeah, kind of like that. Finally, all the loose ends are tied up. The bad guy fights the good guy, the bad guy dies, Gundala's mentor dies, there's a cameo from the next movie protagonist, and there's even a mid-credit scene with a new suit for our hero. Not to mention, there's a scene where one of the mob boss's allies sets out to resurrect an ancient evil who apparently knows Gundala and references a great war that's coming. Motomeyer tells us where exactly Indonesia was in relation to the United States while making the film. Getting people interested in a movie about one of the most popular superheroes in Indonesia wasn't a challenge, the comics magnate explained. From the moment we decided to make a movie, I was already thinking of a larger universe. This was already after Iron Man, and we needed our own version of that, a superhero that could unite a team. For us, that ended up being Gundala, and the moment we announced it, we started getting fan art and songs. We put on an album of songs created by fans and inspired by the character of Gundala, and this is the first movie to have ticket pre-sales in Indonesia. And while there was a film about Gundala in 1981, Anwar has updated it to coincide with the modern-day problems of today's Indonesia. Much like Iron Man in the first Iron Man movie not being set in Vietnam, even though that's his origin in the comics. But the Indonesian filmmakers are smart. They're tailoring each adventure for the core audience that is expected to see the film. Much like Phase 1 of Marvel, there is something for everyone. They also make clear what this is not about. There is something inherently Southeast Asian that is hunting these heroes. Something connected to the geography, which explains why the supervillain in this movie has all this mysticism around him. We're not using alien technology or stories in this universe. Instead, our heroes have powers based in local legends and mythology that grounds the characters in Indonesia and Southeast Asian history and culture. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is political, just like all films are. However, Gundala takes it a step further and ties the issues of a hero fighting a corrupt mob boss to the people of Indonesia specifically. The MCU, on the other hand, doesn't really do that. I mean, you have fans of the comics and you have specific themes in the movies. For example, capitalism at its finest in Iron Man as he privatized world peace, or even grief that the Scarlet Witch deals with in WandaVision. But that doesn't exactly tie to a specific people. It's a great movie. And it's on Peacock right now. So if it's not there anymore, find it. Because it should have eyes on it just like all the other cinematic universes we now speculate on.